So the war was declared unwinnable before it began. Not by the humans, not by their generals or their governments or the people who would eventually have to fight it. It was declared unwinnable by the people who were not going to fight it. The analysts, the strategists, the senior military observers from 17 compact member civilizations who reviewed the situation in the first weeks and produced, collectively and with the authority of accumulated expertise, a consensus assessment that was shared with every relevant party and that said, in the careful language of professional military analysis, the human defensive position cannot be held. The Kethsorath Dominion had committed 412 warships to the offensive. The humans had 61. The Dominion had deployed 300,000 ground forces to the contested reach systems. The humans had 47,000. The Dominion's supply lines ran through established infrastructure they had been building for 20 years. The human supply lines ran through space they had held for less than a decade. The assessment was not wrong on any of its numbers. The numbers were accurate. The assessment was wrong about what the numbers meant. Field observer Veth Ammon had been in the Compact's Independent Documentation Corps for 14 years. He had observed 7 military engagements across 6 member civilizations. He had a reputation for precision, for writing what he saw rather than what he expected to see. He had been assigned to the Kethsoreth campaign specifically because the Corps wanted a precise record of how a civilizational military defeat unfolded, not to celebrate it, to document it, for the historical archive, for the next generation of strategists who would need to understand what happens when an inferior force meets a superior one and the mathematics operate as advertised. He arrived at the Human Forward Command installation on the first day of the Keth-Sorath offensive. He spent the next 417 days there. What he documented was not a defeat. What he documented is this. From the Personal Journal of Field, Observer VETH Haman Compact Independent Documentation Corps Entry 1. Day 1 of the KITHSORATH offensive. I arrived at forward installation Reach 7 at 600. The Keth-Sorath advance has been confirmed across 3 of the 5 contested systems. Their fleet is moving in the formation the Compact's assessment projected, overwhelming force, direct axis, designed to eliminate human resistance in the first engagement and establish control before the Compact's diplomatic intervention mechanisms can activate. The human command structure here is as I was briefed. General Amara Osei-Varda in overall command. I have her file, 31 years of service, 8 campaigns. The record reads as consistently excellent but not extraordinary. Good is the honest word. Her record says good. The Compact's assessment staff rated her as insufficient for this command given the force differential. They recommended she request Compact military support before engagement. I am told she reviewed the recommendation. I am told she said thank you. I am told she did not request support. As I asked her aide why. The aide said, the general says if she waits for enough support to feel comfortable, she'll wait until it's too late to matter. I wrote that down. I did not know on day 1 what to do with it. As I know now. From the Personal Journal of Field, Observer VETH Haman Entry 3, Day 4. I want to document what the installation looks like from the inside, because I think the record should contain this. The assessment predicted that an inferior force facing this kind of offensive would be in one of 2 states: defensive paralysis. The force holds its position and waits to be overwhelmed, or panic dispersal. The force breaks formation and retreats toward survivable positions. This force is in neither state. It is busy. That is the honest word, busy. The installation is running at full capacity and the capacity is not being directed at preparing to die. It is being directed at solving problems. I walked the installation today with General Osei-Varda's aide, who offered the tour after I asked what the command priority was on day 4 of an overwhelming offensive. The aide said the general wants to know everything that isn't working. I said in the defensive posture. He said in everything. Equipment, logistics, communications, personnel, supply. She's been in every department since day 1. She has a list. I said a list of problems. He said a list of fixable problems. She says there's no point cataloging the ones we can't fix. I walked the installation and I observed the following. In the logistics bay, 3 technicians were reconfiguring a supply distribution system that had been designed for static deployment and was being adapted for rapid mobile operation. They had been at it for 36 hours. They were not done. They were, by every observable indicator, going to finish. In the communications center, a specialist named Kofi Asant was manually cross-referencing 17 different unit communication protocols to build what he described to me as a translation layer, a system that would allow units operating on incompatible communication hardware to exchange real-time positional data. He had designed it himself. He had no prior communications engineering training. He had been a tactical analyst for 12 years and had apparently decided that the problem needed solving and that his lack of formal credentials did not change that. So I asked him how long he had been working on it. He said, since I noticed we couldn't talk to each other. I said, when was that? He said, day 1. In the medical section, the chief physician, a woman named Dr. Yale Deschamps, had reorganized the entire triage protocol overnight based on an analysis of the Kethsoreth's previous campaign records. She had identified specific wound profiles that the Kethsoreth's primary weapons produced, and had repositioned her team and supplies to optimize for those specific profiles rather than the general-purpose setup they had arrived with. I asked her how long the reorganization took. She said about 4 hours. I said, did you sleep? She looked at me with the expression of someone who found the question mildly irrelevant. Well, she said after. I walked back to my documentation post, and I wrote the following note to myself. The assessment measured what this force has. I am observing what this force does with what it has. These are different things, and no one told me they would be different things, and I think that is the most significant gap in the assessment methodology. From the KITHSORATH Dominion Imperial Command Campaign Log, Day 7 Classification. Imperial Eyes Only DCLASSIFID Post-War. The advance across Reach 7, 8, and 9 is proceeding on schedule. Human resistance has been encountered at projected coordinates and has been not eliminated but displaced. The displacement is taking longer than projected. Senior Fleet Commander Sarath Vel's assessment: human forces are retreating with unusual coherence. Standard doctrine for inferior forces facing our formation projects a collapse of unit-to-unit coordination within the first 48 to 72 hours. Coordination collapse has not occurred. The human communications appear to be functioning across all unit types, despite the electronic suppression we deployed on day 3. Suppression should have silenced 60% of their inter-unit communication. Field reports suggest approximately 20% of their communication is affected. We are investigating. From the Personal Journal of Field Observer VATH Haman Entry 9, Day 12. The communication specialist, Kofi Asant, the translation layer. He finished it on Day 7. The Kethsoreth's electronic suppression targeted the human unit's primary communication frequencies. The suppression is sophisticated. It is designed to degrade exactly the communication architecture the human force arrived with. The human force no longer has the communication architecture it arrived with. Asant's translation layer runs on a combination of secondary hardware channels, a modified data compression protocol he designed himself, and what he described to me, I asked him on day 8 to explain it as the frequency gap. He said their suppression is built around our documented communication architecture. They modeled our specific frequencies, so I looked for the frequencies they didn't model. I said the frequencies they didn't suppress. He said nobody suppresses everything. Suppression has a cost processing power hardware allocation. They suppressed what they knew we used. I found what they didn't know we used. I said, what were those? He said, maintenance channels, internal diagnostic bands, frequency ranges that are in our hardware because the hardware was designed with them, but that nobody uses operationally because they weren't designed for operational communication. I said, you repurposed maintenance channels for combat communication. He said they're not perfect. They're narrow bandwidth, they have a latency I'm not happy with, and some of the diagnostic bands introduce noise patterns I'm still working on. He paused. He said, but they work, our units can talk to each other. That's what matters. I wrote in my journal that night. He found the gap in their suppression because he was not using what they suppressed. He had built something they did not know to look for. Then I wrote, the Keth-Sarath modeled the human force they expected. The human force that exists is not the force they modeled. Then I wrote, I do not know how to put this in a formal assessment. I know it is the most important thing I have observed. Vetted in 12 days. Part 2 is the middle. From the Personal Journal of Field Observer VATA Chaman Entry 22, Day 40. I need to document General Osei-Varda directly because I have been writing around her for 40 days, and the record is incomplete without her. She is not what I expected a commander in her position to look like. I have documented 7 military engagements. I have observed commanders at every tier. I have a model of what a commander looks like under sustained pressure. There are variations, but the model holds. Sustained pressure produces a narrowing. Decisions become shorter, horizons compress. The commander focuses on what is immediately in front of them because what is immediately in front of them is what determines survival. Osei-Varda is not narrow. She is 40 days into a campaign where her force is outnumbered 7-1, operating at a width of attention that I have not previously observed in a command environment. I will give 3 examples from today alone. At 700, she met with her logistics staff and spent 40 minutes on supply chain resilience for systems she does not yet control, but projects she will need in 60 days. She is planning 60 days ahead while fighting today. At 1100, she met with a delegation of civilian administrators from Reach 9, a system the Keth-Sarath currently occupies, not formerly occupied. Currently, the administrators had come through a refugee corridor. She spent 2 hours with them asking about civilian infrastructure conditions under Dominion occupation, not for immediate military purposes, for what she called the planning that has to start now for what the systems will need when the campaign is over. At 1400, she reviewed morale assessments for 6 of her 47,000 personnel. I said 6 specific personnel out of 47,000. Her aide said she reads 6 every day. She rotates through the full force every 22 days. She says she needs to know how individuals are doing, not just aggregate metrics. I said, why 6, why not 50, why not a summary? He said she says 6 is enough to see specific people. 50 starts to become a report. She wants to see people. I thought about that for the rest of the day. She is fighting a war at 7-1 odds, and she is reading 6 personnel assessments per day because she wants to see specific people. This does not fit any command psychology model I was trained on. I am revising my models. From the KITHSORATH Dominion Imperial Command Campaign Log, Day 61 Classification. Imperial Eyes Only DECLASSIFID Post-War. Revised timeline submitted to the Emperor. The original campaign projection assumed human resistance would collapse within 30 days. We are at day 61. Resistance has not collapsed. Senior Fleet Commander Sarath Vel's revised assessment. The human force is not fighting the campaign we planned for. Their movement patterns do not correspond to any defensive doctrine in the Compact's military literature. They are not holding positions. They are not retreating toward consolidation points. They are, and I want to be precise about this for the record, moving in a pattern that appears to respond to our movements before our movements are complete. Our tactical planning staff has reviewed this finding 3 times. The conclusion: the human command structure is anticipating our maneuvers. Not reacting to them, anticipating them. The explanation our staff has proposed: their communication system, which we believed we had significantly degraded, appears to be functioning at near capacity. We do not know how. Additionally, in the past 30 days, 3 of our logistics installations in the outer reach systems have experienced supply disruptions. 2 were attributed to equipment failure. 1 has no identified cause. The disruptions are minor in isolation. Cumulatively, they have introduced a 7-day delay in our ammunition resupply for the Reach 8 ground forces. 7 days is not decisive, but it is not nothing. We are investigating the cause. From the Personal Journal of Field, Observer VATH Haman Entry 51, Day 90. I have spent 3 weeks trying to understand the logistics disruptions to the Keth-Soreth supply chain, and I believe I have found the mechanism, though I want to note for the record that I am not certain, and that confirming this would require access to operational planning documents that the General has declined to share with an independent observer. What I believe: the General has not been fighting a defensive campaign. She has been fighting an offensive campaign that looks like a defensive one. The human forces movements, which the Compact's assessment staff have described as erratic retreat patterns, and the Keth-Soreth's own command has described as unpredictable, are not erratic. They are the surface pattern of an operation with a different objective than anyone watching from the outside has identified. She is not trying to hold the reach systems. She is trying to make the reach systems expensive to hold. Every Keth-Soreth advance through a human-held position has encountered resistance at a specific point for a specific duration, and then the human force has displaced. The displacement looks like retreat. I now believe the displacement is designed, timed to extract maximum Keth-Soreth operational cost at each position before withdrawal, then reconsolidate, then repeat. The logistics disruptions are the same principle applied to the supply chain, not a grand operation. Small, precise interventions, equipment failures that are probably not failures, access denials that look like system errors, accumulating into a delay that compounds over time. She is not fighting the Keth-Soreth force. She is fighting the Keth-Soreth timeline. Their campaign was designed to conclude in 90 days. Every day past 90 is a day their supply lines extend, their crew fatigue accumulates, their political support for the campaign at home requires justification. She is making them need more days. She had 47,000 personnel and 61 ships. She is using them not to win engagements, but to consume time. I do not know if this will work. The mathematics still favor the Dominion heavily, but I understand now what she is doing, and I understand why she did not request support on day 1. She did not need support to do this. She needed time to do this. And she bought it herself. From the Personal Journal of Field Observer VATH Haman Entry 77, Day 140. Something changed 2 weeks ago that I have been documenting carefully before writing about it. I want to be precise. On Day 126, the Keth-Soreth Dominion's Reachate ground force, approximately 40,000 personnel, attempted an advance through the Veth corridor. The corridor is a natural choke point. The Dominion's tactical staff had identified it as the most efficient route to the Reachate primary installation. I have since learned, through a briefing the General gave me at Day 138 after the situation resolved, that she had identified the corridor as the Dominion's most likely advance route on approximately Day 20. She had spent 100 days preparing for that advance. Not with a defensive installation, not with fortifications or weapon emplacements. With a team of 6 engineers and a problem she had given them on Day 20. The problem, the Veth corridor's geological profile, includes a subsurface water table that the Dominion's heavy ground vehicles would not know to account for because the compact's cartographic data on the system was 60 years old and predated detailed geological survey. The 6 engineers spent 100 days on one task. On Day 126, 40,000 Keth-Soreth ground forces with heavy vehicle support entered the Veth corridor. On Day 128, the advance stalled. The subsurface water table, accessed by the engineers through a technique I am told was designed by the team's youngest member, a 26-year-old named Specialist Remy Okafor who had been a civilian hydrological engineer before enlisting, had been redirected. Not dramatically, precisely, just enough to change the load-bearing capacity of the corridor surface in a specific section. 47 heavy vehicles sank to their axles in what had been solid ground. 6 engineers, 100 days, a 26-year-old hydrologist. 40,000 ground forces delayed by 3 weeks, while the Dominion brought in recovery equipment from their main supply base. 3 weeks. In a campaign the Dominion had planned to finish in 90 days. They were on Day 128. The math was no longer what it had been. Part 3, the turn. From the KITHSORATH Dominion Imperial Command Campaign Log, Day 180 Classification. Imperial Eyes Only DECLASSIFID Post-War. Urgent assessment submitted to the Emperor. The campaign is at Day 180. The original projection was 90 days. We are double the projected timeline with no clear resolution in sight. Supply situation. The accumulated logistics disruptions over the past 180 days have produced a compound effect we did not project. Each individual disruption was minor. Collectively, we are running at 71% supply efficiency. At this rate, we reach critical supply threshold in approximately 60 days. Fleet situation. Crew fatigue across the Dominion's forward fleet has reached levels that our doctrine classifies as operationally degraded. We have rotated crews 3 times. The forward theater remains at the operational distances that require extended deployment cycles. Political situation. The Emperor's Council is requesting a timeline for resolution. We do not have one. The human forces. I need to document this precisely for the historical record. In 180 days, the human force has lost, by our count, 11 ships and approximately 4,000 personnel. In 180 days, we have lost. The documentation staff is still compiling, but the preliminary count is 43 ships and approximately 31,000 personnel. We have 412 ships. We have lost 43. We still have overwhelming superiority. But we have not won. And we are beginning to understand why we have not won. The human force is not trying to match us. It never was. Every engagement we have analyzed from this campaign shows a force that engaged us precisely long enough to extract a specific cost, then withdrew before that cost was reflected back on them. They have been surgically precise about what they take and what they give. They have given us 180 days. They have taken 11 ships and 4,000 people. We have given them 180 days of increasing supply degradation, crew fatigue, political pressure, and the accumulated weight of a campaign that was supposed to be over before anyone noticed it had started. We are not losing. We are being made to run out. The assessment in the campaign's first week said the human position could not be held. It was correct. The human position has not been held. It has been exchanged position for position, day for day, for everything we brought to this campaign. And we are closer to empty than they are. From the Personal Journal of Field Observer VITH Haman Entry 115, Day 220. I want to document a conversation I had with General Osei-Varda on Day 217, because it is the most important conversation in this archive. She gave me 30 minutes on Day 217. I had requested a formal interview. She agreed. I sat across from her in the command installations briefing room, and she gave me her full attention for 30 minutes the way she gives everything her full attention, which is to say completely, which is to say in a way that I have not experienced from anyone else in this campaign and few people in my 14 years of observation work. I asked her, did you know at the beginning that this was winnable? She was quiet for a moment. She said, define winnable. I said the Keth-Soreth Dominion withdraws, the Reach systems are secured. The campaign ends in a human strategic victory. She said in the first week, no, I didn't know that was achievable. I said, what did you know? She said, I knew the campaign was losable in 100 different ways if I made any of 100 specific mistakes, and I knew it was survivable if I didn't. I said, survivable is not the same as winnable. She said, in week 1, survivable was what I was working with. I was buying time. I said, for what? She said, for the campaign to become something different. I said, did you know it would? She was quiet again. The specific quality of quiet she uses when she is deciding how honest to be and landing always on completely honest. She said, I knew that the longer we made it, the more it would cost them. And I knew that they had built this campaign around a timeline. 90 days decisive resolution. I read their doctrine. I understood the supply chain math. I understood the political math at home. She said, I knew that if I could make it take long enough, the campaign they built would run out of room. I said, you designed a 180-day campaign from the beginning. She said, I designed a campaign with no end date. I said, we will do everything we can do every day with what we have, and the campaign ends when one side or the other reaches a point they can't continue from. She said, I was betting that their point would come before ours. I said, that is a significant bet. She said, it is the only bet I had. She looked at me. She said, Observer Vethaman, I want to ask you something. I said, yes. She said, your initial briefing classified this campaign as unwinnable. I was sent a copy of the assessment. I said, yes. She said, what did that assessment measure? I said, force differential, supply line strength, weapons rating, numbers. She said, what did it not measure? I thought about 14 years of observation, about 7 campaigns, about the model I had arrived with and the model I had been revising for 217 days. I said what you would do with what you had. She said, yes. She said the assessment measured our capacity. It did not measure our intent. I said, are those different things? She said they are completely different things. Capacity tells you what is possible. Intent tells you what will actually be attempted. She said we intended to win. I said that sounds simple. She said it is simple. Simple is different from easy. She said we intend Ed to win from day one, not because the numbers supported it, because we decided it. Because 47,000 people on this side decided that the numbers were the problem and the problem could be worked. She said, and then we worked it. I closed my journal that night and I sat for a long time. She had told me in 30 minutes what I had spent 217 days documenting and not fully understanding. The assessment was not wrong about the numbers. It was wrong about the humans. It measured what they had. It did not measure what they had decided. Part 4, the end and afters. From the KITHSORATH Dominion Imperial Command Campaign Log, Day 290 Classification. Imperial Eyes Only DECLASSIFID Post-War. The Emperor has approved the withdrawal. I want to document the circumstances for the historical record because the record should be accurate. The campaign reached the supply threshold on day 273. At that point, forward fleet operations became logistically unsustainable. The Emperor's Council voted on day 280 to authorize withdrawal negotiations. The human government's negotiating position, full withdrawal from all 5 contested reach systems, reparations for civilian infrastructure damage, formal acknowledgement in the Compact's legal register that the contested systems are human sovereign territory. The terms are significant. I will not characterize them as generous because they are not generous, and the human government did not offer them as generosity. They offered them as the outcome of a campaign in which they won. I want to note for the record the final force count. Human forces at campaign end, 44 ships remaining of 61. Approximately 39,000 personnel of 47,000. Dominion forces at campaign end, 281 ships of 412. Approximately 226,000 personnel of 300,000. The Dominion had at campaign's end a vastly larger force than the humans. The Dominion withdrew. The mathematics of the situation on day 290, numbers, weapons, rating, force capacity, still favored the Dominion. But the campaign they had built to win was gone, the timeline was spent, the supply chain was exhausted, the political consensus at home had dissolved. The Emperor's Council had 17 members, 15 of them voted to withdraw. They withdrew not because they were beaten in any engagement. They withdrew because they had run out of the campaign they came with. And the humans were still there. Still working. Still intent on winning. Still doing everything they could do every day with what they had. General Osei-Varda was informed of the withdrawal confirmation at 3:47 station time on day 291. She was already awake. She was reviewing the day 290 personnel assessments. The 6 of them, as always. Her aide told me she read all 6 before she responded to the withdrawal confirmation. Then she sent 3 transmissions. One to the Compact Council, formally acknowledging the campaign's resolution and requesting immediate initiation of the reparations framework. One to her 47,000, the ones still there and the families of the ones who were not. A message I was given permission to read and that I will not reproduce in full because it belongs to them, but which I will describe as the kind of message that someone writes when they have been carrying something for 290 days and can finally put it down and want to make sure the people who carried it with them know that they know. The third transmission was to Specialist Remy Akafer, the 26-year-old hydrologist who had redirected a water table with 5 colleagues in 100 days. The transmission said, "I don't have the language for what you did. I'm going to try to find it. Thank you." From the Personal Journal of Field Observer VATA Chaman final entry, day 300 post-campaign. I submitted my formal report to the Compact's Independent Documentation Corps on day 295. The report is 112 pages and covers everything: the force assessments, the tactical analysis, the strategic framework, the campaign's turning points, the withdrawal conditions. It is complete and it is accurate. It is also, I know, insufficient. It is insufficient because the most important thing I documented in 417 days cannot be adequately represented in an analytical framework. I am going to try to represent it here in my personal journal one final time, because the personal journal is the place where I have been most honest, and I want the honest version in the record. The assessment declared this campaign unwinnable. The assessment was made by excellent analysts using excellent methodology. The assessment failed because it was measuring capacity, and the outcome was determined by attend. Those are different things. I understood this abstractly after day 12. I understood it operationally around day 90. I understood it fully at day 217 when the general told me, "We intended to win." But it was not until day 291, sitting in the command installation at 400 watching General Osei-Varda write 3 transmissions after 290 days of the hardest work I have ever witnessed, that I understood it at the level I needed to understand it. A capacity is what you are given. Intent is what you decide. The humans were given 61 ships and 47,000 people, and a campaign the galaxy had already written the ending to. They decided not to accept the ending. Not because they were stronger than the Keth-Soreth, they were not. Not because they had better weapons, they did not. Not because the numbers were on their side, the numbers were never on their side. Because they had decided to win, and because the decision was not theoretical. It was operational, specific, daily, present in every maintenance channel repurposed, every water table redirected, every personnel assessment read, every morning that the general was already awake before the confirmation arrived because she was already working on the next thing. The assessment called them primitive. Primitive by the measures that assessments use: fleet size, weapons rating, technological sophistication relative to the Dominion's 400 years of military development. On those measures, they were primitive. On the measure that turned out to matter, they were not primitive at all. They were specific. 47,000 specific people with 47,000 specific roles, and one specific general who read 6 of their assessments every day because she wanted to see people, not metrics. Specific people who decided, collectively and individually and daily, that the campaign ended when they said it ended. It ended on day 290. They said so. Postscript from the Compact Council Historical Archive. The Keth-Soreth campaign is studied in 9 of the Compact's 12 accredited military colleges. Not as a case study in tactics. As a case study in what the word unwinnable means and does not mean. General Amara Osei-Varda retired from active service 3 years after the campaign's conclusion. Her retirement address, delivered to the Compact's Military Officers Assembly, is reproduced in full in the Academy's course materials. She said one thing that the course materials have italicized. She said the assessment was right about the numbers. I want to be clear about that. They had more than us. They were better equipped. The numbers were real. She said the assessment was wrong about one thing. She said it assumed that the numbers were the answer. She said numbers are not the answer. Numbers are the problem. The answer is what you do about the numbers. She said we did not win because we had more. We won because we decided that having less was a problem with a solution, and then we found it. She looked out at the assembly. She said there is no such thing as an unwinnable war. She said there are wars that require more than you brought. She said the question is whether you are willing to find more. She stepped back from the podium. She said quietly enough that the front rows heard and the rest heard it later from those who had been there. We were. Specialist Remy Akafer, the hydrologist who redirected a water table on a contested moon with 5 colleagues in 100 days, was in the audience. He was 29 years old. He was already working on something else. Field Observer Veth Ammon submitted one additional document to the Core Archive after the formal report. It was not requested. It was 2 sentences. It read, I arrived to document a defeat. I documented something I do not have a word for. The language will catch up. The language caught up. The word, borrowed from human vocabulary and entered into the Compact's historical lexicon in the year following the campaign, is irrepressible. Defined as incapable of being suppressed or restrained. Synonyms: unstoppable, relentless, unyielding. Origin, documented first in the Compact's military literature, in reference to the Keth Soreth campaign. Reference: see the human force, days 1 through 290. See what happens when people decide. End of archives. They called us primitive. They had the numbers, they had the ships. They had 400 years of undefeated history. We had 47,000 people and 61 ships, and a general who read 6 personnel assessments every morning because she wanted to see people. Not metrics, people. They declared the war unwinnable before it started. They measured our capacity. They forgot to measure our intent. We intended to win. Not because the numbers said we could, because we decided to, and then we woe. Key up every day and work the problem. Every day, 290 of them. They ran out of campaigns. We did not run out of anything. We do not run out. That is what they called primitive. That is what primitive looked like from the other side. 47,000 people who decided that the ending written for them was not the ending they were using. So they wrote a different one. That is all it ever was. A decision. Made once, kept every day, for 290 days. They called us primitive. We called it Tuesday. Inscription on the memorial wall forward installation reached 7 dedicated 3 years after the campaign's end author. Field Observer Veth Ammon at General Osei-Varda's request, he said he was honored. She said, you were there. That makes it yours too. Below it in the general's handwriting, for the 4,000 who did not come home, you were not lost, you were spent. There is a difference, you bought every day we needed, we used everyone.